Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most awkward mistakes. Picture this. A successful businessman sits alone at an upscale restaurant, nervously checking his watch as he waits for a blind date arranged by his well-meaning sister. At the same time, a confident marketing executive rushes through the same restaurant doors, scanning the room for her own blind date set up by her best friend from college. What happens when two people, both expecting to meet someone completely different, end up sitting across from each other? What unfolds when a case of mistaken identity becomes the foundation for something neither of them saw coming? This is the story of David Chun and Sarah Matthews, two souls who were meant to find each other in the most unexpected way possible. It's about how sometimes the universe has better plans than the ones we make for ourselves, and how the wrong person can turn out to be exactly the right one. Their first meeting would be filled with confusion, embarrassment, and laughter. But what started as a simple mix-up would evolve into a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, timing, and destiny. Because sometimes, when you think you've ordered the wrong woman, life delivers exactly who you need. David Chun straightened his tie for the third time in 10 minutes as he sat at table 12 in Milano's, one of downtown Seattle's most elegant Italian restaurants. The soft lighting cast warm shadows across the white tablecloth, and the gentle murmur of conversation from other diners created the perfect ambience for what his sister Lisa had promised would be the perfect blind date. At 32, David had built a successful software consulting business from the ground up, but his personal life remained as organized as his business spreadsheets, and equally predictable. Lisa had been relentless in her matchmaking efforts lately, especially after David's last relationship had ended 8 months ago. "You work too much," she'd told him over coffee just 2 weeks prior. "Jennifer is perfect for you. She's a teacher, loves hiking, wants kids someday, and she's beautiful. Trust me on this one." David had reluctantly agreed, partly to get Lisa off his back, and partly because he knew she was right about his work-life balance. He glanced at his watch again. 7:15. Jennifer was 15 minutes late, which wasn't necessarily a bad sign. Traffic in Seattle could be unpredictable, especially on Friday evenings. David took a sip of his water and reviewed what he knew about his date. Jennifer Walsh, 29, taught 3rd grade at an elementary school in Ballard, enjoyed outdoor activities, and, according to Lisa, had a laugh that could light up a room. They'd exchanged a few polite text messages earlier in the week, enough to confirm the time and place, but not enough for David to get a real sense of her personality. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah Matthews was stuck in exactly the kind of traffic David had been thinking about. She drummed her fingers on the steering wheel of her Honda Civic, mentally calculating how late she was going to be. Her best friend from college, Monica, had set up this blind date with what she described as the most genuine guy I know from my yoga class. The guy's name was Michael. He worked in marketing like Sarah did, and supposedly shared her passion for trying new restaurants and indie films. Sarah wasn't typically one for blind dates. At 28, she'd been focused on climbing the ladder at her marketing firm, where she'd recently been promoted to senior account manager. Her last serious relationship had ended a year ago when her ex-boyfriend Tom decided he needed space to find himself, right around the time Sarah caught him finding himself with a coworker. Since then, she'd thrown herself into work and maintaining her close friendships. But Monica had worn her down with persistence and the promise that Michael was nothing like Tom. By the time Sarah finally found parking and hurried into Milano's, it was 7:20. She quickly scanned the restaurant, looking for a man sitting alone who might match Monica's description of Michael. Tall, dark hair, probably wearing a button-down shirt. Her eyes landed on David at table 12, and she felt a moment of relief. He fit the general description, though he looked more polished and business-oriented than she'd expected from someone Monica knew from yoga class. David looked up as a woman approached his table, and his breath caught slightly. The woman walking toward him was stunning, but she looked nothing like the photos Lisa had shown him of Jennifer. This woman had shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the restaurant's warm lighting, intelligent green eyes, and carried herself with a confidence that was immediately apparent. She wore a well-tailored black blazer over dark jeans, and heels that suggested she'd come straight from work. "You must be David," Sarah said with a warm smile as she reached the table. "I'm so sorry I'm late." Traffic was absolutely insane. David stood up, his mind racing. This definitely wasn't Jennifer, but the woman seemed to know his name. Had Lisa mixed something up? Had the plans changed without him knowing? He decided to go with the flow rather than create an awkward scene right away. "Please, don't worry about it," he said, moving to pull out her chair. Traffic in this city is always unpredictable. Sarah felt a small flutter of surprise at his chivalrous gesture. Monica had mentioned that Michael was a nice guy, but she hadn't expected this level of old-fashioned courtesy. As David helped her into her seat, she caught a hint of his cologne, something subtle and expensive that suggested he put thought into the details. "This place is beautiful," Sarah said, looking around at the restaurant's elegant decor. "I've walked past it 100 times, but never been inside. Monica said you had great taste in restaurants." David paused, his water glass halfway to his lips. Monica? Lisa hadn't mentioned anyone named Monica. But maybe Jennifer had a friend named Monica who knew about the date? "Well, I can't take all the credit," he said carefully. "I had some help with the recommendation." Their waitress approached with menus and asked if they'd like to start with drinks. Sarah ordered a glass of the house red wine, and David decided to join her, hoping the alcohol might help him figure out what was happening. As the waitress walked away, they both opened their menus and fell into the comfortable rhythm of discussing the options. "The seafood risotto sounds amazing," Sarah commented, genuinely impressed by the variety of choices. "I have to admit, I was a little nervous about tonight. I haven't done this whole blind date thing in a while." "Same here," David replied honestly. "My sister is always trying to set me up with people, but this is the first time in months I've actually agreed to go through with it." Sarah's eyebrows raised slightly. "Your sister? That's funny. I thought Monica said you two met through yoga class." David felt the first real red flag wave in his mind. "Yoga class? I don't really do yoga. I think there might be some confusion here." At the same moment, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and saw Monica's name. "Hey babe, Michael just texted me. He's running super late because of a family emergency. He'll be there by 8 p.m. if you can wait. He's at table 8, brown hair, navy shirt. Sorry for the delay." Sarah's face went pale as she read the message, then looked across the table at David, who was wearing a gray button-down shirt and definitely not sitting at table 8. She glanced around the restaurant and spotted table 8, where a man in a navy shirt was indeed sitting alone, frequently checking his phone. "Oh my God," Sarah said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I've made a terrible mistake." David noticed the change in her expression and the way she was staring at her phone. "What's wrong?" Sarah looked back at him, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I think I'm supposed to be at table 8. With Michael. And you're probably waiting for someone named Jennifer." The realization hit David like a wave. Jennifer. Of course. He looked around and spotted a woman near the entrance, clearly scanning the restaurant with the slightly lost expression of someone looking for their blind date. She had blonde hair and was wearing a floral dress, much more in line with what he'd expected based on Lisa's description. "You must have ordered the wrong woman," Sarah said with a nervous laugh, starting to gather her purse. "I should go." But David found himself smiling, a genuine expression that surprised him as much as it did her. There was something about Sarah's mortified expression, the way she handled the awkward situation with humor instead of drama, that he found incredibly appealing. "No," he said simply, his smile widening. "You're the one." Sarah paused, her purse halfway off the table. "What do you mean?" "I mean," David said, his voice gaining confidence, "maybe this mix-up is the best thing that could have happened tonight. I was expecting to have a polite conversation with someone my sister picked out for me based on a checklist of compatibility factors. Instead, I'm sitting across from someone who makes me want to forget about checklists entirely." Sarah stared at him, unsure whether to be flattered or concerned about his mental state. "But we don't even know each other. You were supposed to meet Jennifer, and I was supposed to meet Michael. They're probably both here by now, wondering where we are." David glanced toward the entrance, where the woman he assumed was Jennifer was now looking around with increasing frustration. Near table 8, the man in the navy shirt was doing the same thing. "You're right," he said. "They are here, and we could both get up right now, walk over to our intended dates, and have the evenings that were planned for us." "Or," Sarah prompted, though she found herself curious about where he was going with this. Or we could stay right here and see what happens when two people meet without any expectations or predetermined compatibility assessments. When was the last time you did something completely spontaneous? Sarah considered this. The truth was, spontaneity had been in short supply in her life lately. Between the demands of her job and the careful way she'd been approaching dating since her breakup with Tom, everything felt calculated and safe. There was something undeniably appealing about the idea of throwing caution to the wind, especially with someone who seemed to find their awkward situation charming rather than catastrophic. "What about Jennifer and Michael?" she asked. "We can't just leave them hanging." David pulled out his phone. "I'll text my sister and ask her to let Jennifer know there's been a mix-up, and suggest she introduce herself to the gentleman at table 8, who's also been stood up. What do you think? Best case scenario, they hit it off. Worst case, they both have someone to commiserate with about their blind dates disappearing." Sarah found herself laughing despite the surreal nature of the situation. "You're seriously suggesting we orchestrate our own replacement blind date for the people we were supposed to meet? Why not? We're both here, we both seem reasonably intelligent and well-adjusted, and the wine is excellent. Plus, I have to admit I'm curious about someone who handles social disasters with this much grace." Sarah looked across the table at David, really looked at him this time. There was something magnetic about his confidence, the way he'd turned what could have been an embarrassing situation into something that felt like an adventure. His eyes had a warmth that suggested he smiled often, and there was an ease about him that made her feel like she'd known him longer than the 15 minutes they'd been talking. "This is crazy," she said. But she was smiling as she said it. "The best things usually are," David replied, raising his water glass in a mock toast. "To wrong tables and right people." Sarah hesitated for just a moment before raising her own glass to meet his. "To spontaneous decisions and the hope that we don't regret this tomorrow." As their glasses clinked together, both of them felt a spark of something that neither had expected when they'd gotten dressed for their respective blind dates that evening. It was the kind of moment that would later become the story they'd tell at dinner parties, the meet-cute that friends would describe as meant to be. But, in the moment, it simply felt like the beginning of something interesting. The waitress returned to take their order, and, as David and Sarah began the real conversation, the one not shaped by their friends' expectations or predetermined compatibility factors, they both realized that sometimes the most important journeys begin with taking the wrong turn. What they didn't know yet was how profoundly this chance encounter would reshape both of their lives, or how the simple act of choosing to stay at the wrong table would become the foundation for everything that followed. Their evening was just beginning, and already it felt different from any date either of them had been on before. There was an electricity in the air, a sense of possibility that came from stepping outside the carefully planned boundaries of their normal lives. As they settled in to actually get to know each other, both David and Sarah felt the thrilling uncertainty of standing at the edge of something completely new. The seafood risotto turned out to be everything Sarah had hoped for, but she found herself barely noticing the food as she and David fell into the kind of conversation that made time seem irrelevant. What had started as an awkward mix-up had transformed into something neither of them had experienced in years, genuine connection without pretense or agenda. "So let me get this straight," Sarah said, twirling her fork through the creamy rice. "You started your consulting business because you got frustrated with how inefficiently your previous company was using their software systems?" David nodded, his eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm he always felt when discussing his work. "It was driving me crazy. They had all these powerful tools that could have streamlined everything, but they were using them like expensive calculators. I kept proposing improvements, and management kept saying, 'That's not how we've always done it.' And instead of just accepting that, you decided to leave and show them how it should be done," Sarah observed with admiration. "That takes serious courage. Most people just complain and stay comfortable." "What about you?" David asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Monica mentioned you work in marketing, but that could mean anything from social media management to strategic campaign development." Sarah smiled at his perceptiveness. "I'm on the strategic side, actually. I work for a mid-sized firm that specializes in helping local businesses develop their brand identity and market positioning. It's part creative, part analytical, and part psychology. Psychology. David raised an eyebrow. Think about it, Sarah said, her voice gaining animation. Marketing isn't really about selling products. It's about understanding what makes people tick, what they're afraid of, what they dream about, and then showing them how your client can help them get from point A to point B. It's basically applied psychology with a business application. David found himself captivated by the way Sarah's mind worked. She didn't just do her job, she understood the deeper mechanics behind it. That's fascinating. I never thought about marketing that way, but you're absolutely right. My clients hire me because they're afraid their current systems are holding them back from growth, and they dream about efficiency and scalability. Exactly, Sarah said excitedly. See, you're already thinking like a marketer. What you do is solve technical problems, but what you're really selling is peace of mind and the promise of a better future. Their conversation was interrupted by David's phone buzzing with a text from Lisa. He glanced at it and couldn't help but smile. Well, this is interesting. My sister says Jennifer and Michael hit it off immediately when she introduced them. Apparently, they discovered they both volunteer at the same animal shelter but had never crossed paths. Sarah laughed, pulling out her own phone to check her messages. Monica just sent me practically the same text. She's already planning their second date in her head. I think we accidentally became matchmakers. Not the worst unintended consequence of a mix-up, David observed. So we managed to solve their romantic problems and create our own interesting situation at the same time. Speaking of our situation, Sarah said, her tone becoming slightly more serious. I have to ask, are you always this comfortable with uncertainty? Because most people would have politely corrected the mistake and moved on to their intended date. David considered her question thoughtfully. Honestly, no. If you'd asked anyone who knows me, they'd say I'm the guy with the 5-year plan and backup strategies for my backup strategies. But something about tonight feels different. Maybe it's you, or maybe it's the situation, but for the first time in months, I'm not thinking 3 steps ahead. Sarah felt a warm flutter in her chest at his honesty. I know what you mean. I've been so careful about everything since my last relationship ended. Every decision gets analyzed from every possible angle. It's exhausting, actually. What happened? David asked gently. With your last relationship, I mean. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Sarah appreciated his sensitivity. Most men either avoided the topic entirely or pushed too hard for details. His name was Tom. We dated for 2 years, and I thought we were building something real. Turns out he was building something real too, just with someone else. She paused, surprised at how easy it was to talk to David about this. The betrayal hurt, obviously, but what really got to me was how blind I'd been to all the signs. I promised myself I'd be more careful next time. I'm sorry, David said simply. Being betrayed like that changes how you see everything. It does, Sarah agreed. What about you? Lisa mentioned you'd been single for a while when she was setting this up. David's jaw tightened slightly. Her name was Rachel. We were together for 3 years, and I was actually planning to propose. Then, one day she told me she felt like she was dating my calendar instead of me. She said I was more passionate about my business than I could ever be about a person. That must have been devastating, Sarah said softly. The worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong, David admitted. I did put my business first. I told myself I was working so hard to build a good future for us, but really, I was just more comfortable with spreadsheets than emotions. It's easier to solve technical problems than relationship problems. Sarah nodded understanding. It's funny how we both ended up here tonight, isn't it? Both of us trying to be so careful and controlled. And then, this completely random thing happens that throws all of that out the window. Maybe random isn't the right word, David suggested. Maybe this is exactly what we both needed. Their waitress approached to ask about dessert, and they realized they'd been talking for over 2 hours. The restaurant was starting to empty out as the evening crowd made way for late-night diners. Neither David nor Sarah wanted the night to end, but they also weren't sure how to navigate the transition from their accidental dinner to whatever came next. I should probably head home soon, Sarah said reluctantly. I have an early client meeting tomorrow. Of course, David said, though he felt a pang of disappointment. Can I at least walk you to your car? I'd like that, Sarah replied, gathering her purse. As David signaled for the check, Sarah found herself studying his profile. There was something solid and reassuring about him, but also an unexpected vulnerability that drew her in. He'd been willing to share honestly about his past relationship and his own shortcomings, which was refreshing after years of dating men who treated every conversation like a job interview where they had to present their best possible image. Outside the restaurant, the Seattle evening had turned crisp and clear. The city lights reflected off the nearby sound, and there was energy in the air that made everything feel possible. As they walked slowly towards Sarah's car, neither of them wanted to acknowledge that their unexpected evening was coming to an end. "This might be presumptuous," David said as they reached her Honda, "but I'd really like to see you again. Under less accidental circumstances." Sarah turned to face him fully, studying his expression in the streetlight. "I'd like that too," she said honestly. "But I have to be upfront about something. I'm not looking for anything casual right now. I know that might sound intense for a first date that wasn't even supposed to be a first date, but I've learned I'm not good at keeping things light." David's smile widened. "Good, because I was going to say something similar. I'm 32, I know what I want, and I don't have time for games. If we're going to do this, I'd rather we both be honest about what we're looking for." "And what are you looking for?" Sarah asked, though part of her wasn't sure she was ready to hear the answer. "Partnership," David said without hesitation. "Someone who challenges me, supports me, and isn't afraid to call me out when I'm being an idiot. Someone who has their own dreams and ambitions, but wants to build something together too. Someone who can handle both my intensity and my need for quiet moments." Sarah felt her heart speed up. His answer was so direct and thoughtful, so different from the vague non-committal responses she was used to hearing from men her age. "That's exactly what I want too," she said quietly. "So where does that leave us?" David asked. "I think it leaves us with a choice," Sarah replied. "We can either get scared about how intense this feels for a first meeting and back away, or we can be brave enough to see where it goes." David stepped slightly closer, and Sarah could smell his cologne again, that subtle scent that had caught her attention in the restaurant. "I vote for brave," he said. "Me too," Sarah whispered. They stood there for a moment, the space between them charged with possibility. David reached out to brush a strand of hair away from Sarah's face, and she felt herself lean into his touch. When he kissed her, it was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a promise, like the beginning of something important. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I should probably go," Sarah said, though she made no move toward her car. "Probably," David agreed, also staying exactly where he was. "Will you text me tomorrow?" she asked. "I was planning to text you before you even got home," David admitted with a grin. Sarah laughed. "Okay, but maybe wait at least until I've had time to get out of the parking garage." "Deal," David said, stepping back to give her space to get into her car. "Drive safely." As Sarah drove home, she found herself replaying every moment of the evening. The way David had handled the initial confusion, his honesty about his past relationship, the genuine interest he'd shown in her work and thoughts, and especially that kiss. It had been years since she'd met someone who made her feel both excited and comfortable at the same time. David watched her taillights disappear around the corner before heading to his own car. He couldn't remember the last time a date had surprised him, let alone completely exceeded his expectations. Sarah was intelligent, funny, ambitious, and beautiful, but more than that, she seemed genuinely interested in understanding who he was beneath the successful businessman exterior. She asked good questions and gave thoughtful answers, and she'd made him laugh more in one evening than he had in months. As he drove home to his downtown condo, David found himself already planning their next date. Nothing elaborate or showy. He had a feeling Sarah would appreciate something more personal and thoughtful. Maybe the farmer's market on Saturday morning, followed by a walk through Pike Place Market? Or perhaps they could check out that new art gallery she'd mentioned during dinner. His phone buzzed with a text just as he pulled into his parking garage. For a split second, he hoped it might be Sarah, even though they'd agreed he would text her first. Instead, it was from Lisa. "How did it go with Jennifer? She seemed really nice when I met her at the restaurant." David smiled as he typed back, "I'll call you tomorrow and explain everything. Let's just say your matchmaking skills are better than you know." Meanwhile, Sarah was fielding a similar text from Monica. Michael texted that he had a great time with Jennifer. How was your mystery man? I want details. Sarah replied. You were right about tonight being exactly what I needed. Talk tomorrow. As both David and Sarah got ready for bed, they were each thinking about the strange turns that life could take. Neither of them had woken up that morning expecting their evening to unfold the way it had. They'd both approached the night with mild reluctance and low expectations, only to discover something that felt like it could change everything. The mix-up that had brought them together was the kind of coincidence that made you believe in fate. But what happened next would be entirely up to them. They'd found each other accidentally, but now they had to choose deliberately whether to pursue what they'd discovered. As they fell asleep in their respective apartments, both of them were looking forward to finding out what that choice would lead to. 3 months after their accidental first meeting, David and Sarah had settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. David had followed through on his promise to text her before she got home that first night, and their second date at Pike Place Market had been even better than their unexpected dinner at Milano's. By the time autumn settled over Seattle, bringing shorter days and the promise of rain, they'd become a genuine couple. Their relationship had developed with surprising ease. Sarah found that David was exactly who he'd appeared to be that first night. Honest, driven, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny when he let his guard down. David discovered that Sarah's intelligence and ambition were matched by a warmth and loyalty that made him want to be a better version of himself. They complemented each other in ways that neither had experienced before. On this particular Saturday morning in November, Sarah was curled up on David's couch, her laptop balanced on her knees, as she worked on a presentation for Monday's client meeting. David was in his home office, catching up on some coding for a project that was due the following week. It was the kind of comfortable domesticity that they'd both been surprised to embrace so naturally. Coffee refill. David called from the kitchen, where he'd gone to take a break from debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code. Please, Sarah called back without looking up from her screen. And maybe one of those blueberry muffins if there are any left? David smiled as he prepared 2 fresh cups of coffee. This was exactly what he'd been missing without realizing it. Having someone to share quiet Saturday mornings with, someone who understood that sometimes you needed to work on weekends but also made the work feel less isolating. Sarah had a way of being present even when they were each focused on their own tasks. He returned to the living room with coffee and muffins, setting Sarah's on the side table next to her. She looked up from her laptop and smiled, the kind of genuine, unguarded expression that still made his heart skip a beat. How's the Henderson account presentation coming along? He asked, settling back into his chair with his own coffee. Good, I think, Sarah said, stretching her arms above her head. They want to completely rebrand their restaurant chain, which is exciting, but they also have some pretty unrealistic expectations about timeline and budget. The classic client challenge, David observed. They want everything perfect, beautiful, and completed yesterday for half the market rate. Exactly. But I think I've found a way to give them what they really need while managing their expectations. Sometimes clients don't actually know what they want. They just know they want something different from what they have now. David nodded thoughtfully. That's what I love about your approach to work. You don't just deliver what they ask for. You figure out what will actually solve their problems. Sarah felt that familiar warmth that came from being truly understood. Speaking of work, how's your project going? Still fighting with that inventory management system? Making progress, David said. The system itself is straightforward, but integrating it with their existing database is like trying to get 2 people who speak different languages to have a detailed conversation. Everything requires translation. Sounds frustrating. It is, but it's also satisfying when you finally get the pieces to fit together properly. There's something almost meditative about solving complex technical problems. Sarah saved her work and closed her laptop, giving David her full attention. I love watching you talk about your work. You get this expression like you're solving puzzles that actually matter. They do matter, David said seriously. When I help a business streamline their operations, it means they can serve their customers better, their employees are less stressed, and the owners can focus on growth instead of constantly putting out fires. It's not just about the technology. It's about making people's working lives better. This was one of the things Sarah admired most about David. He could have easily focused on the financial success of his business. And he had been quite successful, but he genuinely cared about the impact his work had on people's lives. It was the same quality that had made him choose to stay at the wrong table that first night instead of politely correcting the mistake. "I have something I want to talk to you about," Sarah said, her tone shifting slightly. David immediately gave her his full attention, setting down his coffee cup. "What's on your mind?" "My lease is up for renewal next month," Sarah began, tucking her legs under her on the couch. "And I've been thinking about what I want to do." David's pulse quickened. They'd been spending most nights together anyway, either at his place or hers. But they hadn't officially discussed taking the next step of living together. He'd been hoping she might bring it up, but he hadn't wanted to pressure her by suggesting it himself. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully. "Well," Sarah said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "I could renew for another year, which would be the safe, practical choice. Or I could be spontaneous and see if my boyfriend might be interested in having a roommate." David's grin was immediate and genuine. "I think your boyfriend would be very interested in that arrangement. In fact, he's been hoping you might suggest it." "Really?" Sarah asked, though she'd suspected as much from the way he'd started clearing space in his closet and bathroom without being asked. "Really? I love having you here, Sarah. I love waking up next to you. And I love that we can work in comfortable silence together. And I love coming home to someone who actually cares about how my day went." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "I also love that you challenge me to think about things differently, and that you're not afraid to tell me when I'm being too rigid or work-obsessed." Sarah felt her heart swell. "I love all of those things too. Plus, your coffee maker is significantly better than mine, and your couch is ridiculously comfortable. Those are definitely the most important factors in any major life decision," David said solemnly, making Sarah laugh. "So we're really going to do this?" she asked, suddenly, feeling a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. "We're really going to do this," David confirmed. "Although we should probably talk about logistics and boundaries and how we want to handle expenses and household responsibilities." Sarah groaned dramatically. "Look at you, already making lists and planning systems. Hey, you knew what you were getting into when you decided to date someone whose idea of romance is a shared Google Calendar," David protested. But he was smiling. "Actually, I find your organizational skills oddly attractive," Sarah admitted. "It's nice being with someone who thinks ahead and plans for contingencies. My last relationship was with someone who treated every decision like an impossible burden." David's expression softened. "I never want you to feel like I'm trying to control or organize you, though. I know I can get a little intense about planning." "David," Sarah said, reaching over to take his hand, "the difference is that you plan because you care about outcomes and want things to work well. Tom avoided planning because he didn't want to be accountable for anything. There's a huge difference between being thoughtful and being controlling." "Good," David said, squeezing her hand. "Because I have some thoughts about how we could rearrange the home office to accommodate both of our work needs." Sarah laughed again. "Of course you do. Let me guess, you've already measured everything and researched the best desk configurations." "I may have done some preliminary space planning," David admitted sheepishly. "Show me," Sarah said, standing up and pulling him toward the office. As David excitedly explained his ideas for maximizing their shared workspace, Sarah found herself marveling at how right this felt. Moving in together was a big step, but it didn't feel scary or rushed. It felt like the natural next phase of something they'd been building together since that first accidental dinner. Later that afternoon, as they walked through the neighborhood looking at Sarah's apartment complex to get a sense of what needed to be packed and moved, they ran into David's sister Lisa coming out of a nearby coffee shop. "Sarah," Lisa exclaimed with genuine enthusiasm. "Perfect timing. I was just thinking about you too." "Hey, Lisa," Sarah said warmly. She'd met David's sister several times now and genuinely enjoyed her company, despite the slightly awkward foundation of their relationship. "What were you thinking about?" David asked suspiciously. His sister's enthusiasm often meant she was planning something. "Jennifer and Michael's engagement party next month," Lisa said with a grin. "They want you two to be there since you're technically responsible for them meeting." "They're engaged already?" Sarah asked in surprise. "It's only been 3 months. I know, it's fast, but They're both 30 and they know what they want, Lisa said. Plus, Michael said meeting Jennifer made him realize he'd been wasting time with the wrong people. And she said the same thing about him. David